Hey traders, this is MsPutOptions. My website is www.MsPutOptions.com, where it can best be accessed via Internet Explorer and not Google Chrome. Today is going to be a very short tutorial concerning covered calls and concerning the math behind covered calls. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the actual mechanics behind placing a covered call trade. And there are actual two steps. The first step, you would have to buy 100 shares of a stock or ETF. And so if you buy 100 shares of a stock or ETF, that means that you will own the stock. The stock is yours. You will own the stock. And number two, you will have to sell a covered call on these particular shares. So as a writer or a seller, what you're doing is that you're giving the buyer the right to buy your stock at a particular strike price on a particular date. So once again, you would have to buy 100 shares of the stock or the ETF, meaning that you would own the stock or the ETF. And number two, you would have to sell covered calls on these particular shares. So as the writer or the seller, you're giving the buyer the right to buy your stock at a particular strike on a particular date. Now, these are two steps needed in order to write a covered call. However, in order to eliminate these two steps, there is one step that you can actually do both of these transactions in, and it's called a buy right. We will not be talking about a buy right today, but exactly buy right is where you're actually able to buy the shares of the stock, the 100 shares of the stock, and also place the covered call all in one transaction. We will not be discussing that particular situation today. So let's move on with the scenario. So we said initially you would have to buy the stock or the ETF, and let's say the ETF, the ticker symbol is XYZ, and you bought it at $42 per share, and it cost you $4,200. And the reason why it cost you $4,200, because we already said that you have to buy 100 shares of the stock, and if it's trading for $42, $42 times 100 is $4,200. So now we have to go ahead and sell a covered call. Now we would sell a covered call higher than the strike we bought it at. So let's just say hypothetically we picked a strike price of $44 per share, and we collected a premium of $1. Let's just say hypothetically on this $44 strike price, the premium that we collected was $1. And so that would equal $100. And the reason why we know this is because $1 times 100 shares equals $100. So I hope I haven't lost anybody thus far. So thus far we're out of pocket. We paid $4,200 to actually buy the stock of the ETF. That is going to be a debit. And then we received a credit of $100, which is the premium. We take the $1 times the 100 shares, and that will give us $100. So that $100 is now a credit. So total out of pocket would be $4,100. When we take the $4,200 debit in order to purchase the stock, and then we receive the premium of $1, which is $100 after we multiply it by 100 shares, and this is a credit. So our total out of pocket is $4,100. Now, we have two options. We have option A and we have option B. Now, both options are great. I preferably would prefer option A over option B, but it really doesn't make a difference because you're going to make money regardless. So let's look at option A. Option A, let's say hypothetically, if the stock falls below $44 per share, and remember this was your strike price when you sold your covered call, your option expires worthless. You can repeat this process and you'll be able to keep the $100 credit that you received initially for placing the trade. So let's say that again. Our strike price was $44 per share. We bought the stock for $42 per share. As long as the stock stays at or below $44 per share, then our option will expire worthless, and we can repeat this process over and over and over again, and we will be able to keep the $100 premium that we hypothetically collected by placing this trade. So this would be the ideal situation. We will be able to keep our stock and do this over and over and over again. Now, option B is not a bad choice either. Let's say the stock rises above our strike price of $44. So if it rises above our strike price of $44, the buyer exercises his or her right to pay you $44 per share for your stock. Now this last option is an interesting option, but it also can be very profitable as well. So let's talk about a little bit about the math concerning option B. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the math concerning option B. So with option B, hypothetically, we're going to pretend that the stock has risen above your $44 strike price. If this were to happen, the buyer is able to exercise his or her right to pay you $44 per share for the stock. Now remember, initially you only paid $42 per share for the stock, so now you're able to sell it back for $44 per share for the stock. So if we take your strike price of $44 and we subtract it by the $42 that was required of you in order to own the stock per share, and that would be a profit of $2. We would take this $2 profit and we would multiply it by 100 shares. So this would be an additional credit of $200. So let's look at the overall math for option B. Initially, we had to come up with $4,200 in order to purchase the stock, and this was going to be a debit. And we also collected upfront the $1 premium times the 100 shares. So that gave us a $100 premium that we collected, total premium that we collected, and this is going to be a credit. Now, we're looking at option B. With option B, we also collected the premium up front like we did with option A. However, with option B, since the stock increased to $44 per share, we were able to sell it back, and when we sold it back, we got a $2 credit. We would take this $2 credit times the 100 shares, and that would be $200. So that would be an additional $200. So when we do the math, if you take the $100 premium that we collected up front, and then the additional $200 that we're collecting because we had to sell the stock back, the total credit would be a grand total of $300. So option B, as you can see, is more profitable than option A. But let me go over why I prefer option A over option B. Now here we are comparing our two options. We have option A and then we had option B. Now I prefer option A, and the reason why I prefer option A, even though the premium that I collected only gave me $100 and my grand total was $100, I was able to keep the stock that was trading for $42 per share. So this allows me to trade this particular stock or ETF over and over again without me selling my stock back. So this is why I prefer option A versus option B. However, option B is very nice as well. I'm able to keep the premium of the $100 just like I'm able to keep the premium of the $100 that I collected up front with option A. However, I would collect an additional $200. So my grand total would be the $100 premium I collected plus the $200 I'm now collecting for selling my option back. So the grand total would be $300. As you can see, option B is more profitable than option A. In option A, I only collected $100, but here in option B, I'm collecting $300. All right? So, but let's just say the reason why I prefer option A over B is because you have to repurchase the stock, maybe at a higher price, because your stock was called away from you. And this is what we call it when you have to sell your option back during the covered calls. When your option was called away from you, you no longer own the stock. You no longer own the stock. So you cannot reuse the stock over and over and over again like you're doing here in option A. You would have to buy the stock back again, and then you would have to place a covered call on it, or you can do a buy right, which I said earlier we would not be talking about. So, this is the reason why I prefer option A. Sure, anybody could see that option B is more profitable. But however, what if you try to purchase this stock back and the stock is trading for higher? Then you're going to have to come up with more and more money in order to purchase the stock initially. So, but there is a upside. But by having the stock called away from you, you are able to choose a different stock to trade. So that is a plus. That is a plus. But I still prefer option A versus option B because I am able to place this trade over and over and over again and collect the premium up front without having my stock called away from me, and then thus I would have to purchase the stock back again. I would have to repurchase the stock. So I would prefer option A over option B only because of this simple fact. Because what if I have to purchase the stock, that same stock, at a higher price? Then I don't think I would care for that too much. So this is my reason for picking option A versus option B. Again, my website is www.MsPutOptions.com. My website can best be accessed through Internet Explorer and not Google Chrome.